what we're going to do is we'll take this away, and Glenn will begin with a reading from the last Irish question, and then I will attempt to ask him intelligent questions about it. I will fail, and he is a man of immense humanity, and he will respond compassionately to my failure to do so in a conversation.
How you doing? You okay? Wow, you really don't sound very definite at all. Shall I just read something? Shall I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read. I'm going to stand up again. Can I do that? That's a wee bit better. So about this, Taoiseach, thank you so much. I know you weren't just speaking to me, but as a member of the audience, thank you so much. And Simon and Victoria, thank you very much indeed. And to everybody who's organised this, and to all of you for being here. I'm just going to do 3 numbers, and then we're going to have. I'm going to read a few pages from this this book, which is called The Last Irish Question. So, can you hear me? Okay. Sorry for you. So in 2017, my publisher, my editor Neil Belton at Head of Zeus, asked me if I thought there might be a book in Brexit and how it affected Northern Ireland, since Northern Ireland was so completely central to all the discussions around Brexit. So I wrote a book, and if I had any marketing skills at all, I'd have it in my hand and not in my bag behind me. But it's behind me. It's called Backstop Land, and it was to come out on the 1st of October. Help me out here. 2019. 1st of October 2019. That's when we were supposed. The United Kingdom was supposed to leave the European Union. But the only thing that came out in 2019, October the 1st, was my book about it, because they deferred it for several months, and the backstop disappeared. So the only remnant of the backstop is indeed on the front cover of my book. Anyway, eventually we entered into the transition period, which began on the 1st of February 2020, and Backstop Land being such a resounding success at getting rid of the backstop, my publishers asked me if there might be a book about what came next, and about the what was beginning to sound like a bit of clamour for. How long have we got, by the way? Is it a long time do we have, or is it just like a wee short time? Well, I mean, okay, it's okay. You might just get a slice of pizza instead of like a whole pizza, because I know that after this there's pizza, and then we all talk. Anyway, so we wondered if there might be a book about what followed on after the Brexit, and as I said, what was becoming a bit of a, I wouldn't say it was a clamour, but there were certainly louder voices, or voices sounding more loudly, talking about a referendum on the future of the island. And so we thought we would, I thought I would write a book about that. So I just wanted to call it 6 into 26. From the graffiti where I grew up in Belfast, 6 into 26 won't go. I grew up in a Protestant area of... Actually, do you know what? I grew up in a part of Belfast that didn't know it was a Protestant area until the start of the Troubles, and then all of a sudden guess what? It was a Protestant area, and then it became a very Protestant area, and it's now an unmistakably Protestant area if you go near it. But anyway, so 6 into 26 won't go was how we expressed our feelings on the national question and the potential for reunification. There's a flip side of that, which is 26 plus 6 equals 1. I don't know if you've ever seen those stickers and slogans. 26 plus 6 equals the reunited Ireland. So I just wanted to call it 6 into 26. My publishers... I've never called a book, none of my books have come out with the titles I thought they were going to have when I was writing them. So they were slightly worried if I did 6 into 26 that it would end up in the kind of junior cert maths section. So they called it The Last Irish Question, will 6 into 26 ever go? And I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to spend the entire 11 months, wasn't it? The transition period was to be 11 months, from 1st of February through till the end of December, that would be right, 2020, going around Ireland. I was going to go to all 32 counties, and I was going to take the temperature on the desire for reunification, opinions on Northern Ireland, all that kind of thing. And about 5 weeks after I started on this, of course, the pandemic landed on us. So I did most of the writing of 6 into 26 in the back bedroom at home. And I was just watching all the time, as we all were. I was watching to see what the restrictions were and what was possible in the way of travel. And the moment a road opened, I got into the car and I drove down it and tried to land somewhere where I could do a bit of research and write this book. So this is the book. This is the book that I wrote. So I thought I'd just read a little bit of it. Oh, here it is here. Right. I need my glasses. Did you pay money for this? Is this a free event? You can claim it back. Like airlines, my enjoyment was suspended for 2 hours while that guy stood there and told me about his book. Right. So this is from, am I holding that high enough? I'm reading online an article on the 1932 Eucharistic Congress, which touches on the importance of advertising and includes images of some of the souvenirs on offer. E.C. Hancock of Burkey, Dublin, is selling a series of what it styles Pascalite lamps for windows. The bulbs set within glass in the shape of flames, single, duoform and triform, at 5 shillings, 10 shillings and 13 shillings respectively, and at 35 shillings a Pascalite altar, a 3-tiered affair with a cross lamp in ruby natural glass on top. The altar, the listing concludes, is of Dublin manufacture, there being, besides adverts in the papers of the time, warnings about foreign-made goods coming in, English goods in particular, including wrongly designed Eucharistic flags. The official flags sold at a shilling each and were flown alongside yellow and white halved papal flags and the Irish tricolour. I end up on eBay looking for more souvenirs. I've been working all day. This is my way of bringing the plane gently into land. And I find a postcard showing these last 2 flags, staffs crossing in the stem of a chalice. And if there is a shade of a difference in the yellow half of the papal flag and the 3rd band of the Irish flag, for the life of me, I can't see it. Which gets me thinking. It's in the Irish Constitution, Article 7, pages 8 and 9. You could all recite that, couldn't you? Can you just, do you want to do, should we join in and... I'll tell you. Okay. So it's in the Irish Constitution, Article 7, pages 8 and 9. The Constitution runs to 260 pages or 130 pages twice. Once in Irish, the official language of the state, see Article 8, and once in the second language, English, though curiously, the articles are published in the second language first and the first second. The national flag is the tricolour of green, white, and orange. Then I do the Irish bit, but I can only write that. I can't really say it terribly well. My wife can, and she told me how to do it this morning, and but she's still in Cork City, and I'm here, and she's not whispering to me, so... Page 8 and 9, anyway, Article 7. The Constitution does not expand on the choice of colours or apply to them a symbolic gloss. Though it's, by the way, I did ask my father-in-law as well about the colour orange, which is flamboy. Flamboy? Flamboy? He said, I've never, oui? F-L-A-N-N-B-H-U-I, Fada? Oui. Yellow. Is that yellow? Well, I think we've hit on something here in the Constitution. A slight translation problem there. So in page 8, in the English bit, it's orange. In the I just copied it out. Flamboy. Yeah, okay. And it's more yellowy than orangey? A flaming yellow. Flaming yellow. Flaming yellow. Okay. And Suntas Nashunta is kind of in national harmony. Would that be? This is, yeah. I hope somebody's recording this, by the way, that we are deconstructing the, yes, okay, thank you. Yes. Yeah, okay, so, thank you, Taoiseach. Right, we're losing there's 2 pages left after this, so I'm going to go really fast. So the national flag is the tricolour of green, white and orange. The Constitution does not expand on the choice of colours or apply to them a symbolic gloss, though it's generally understood to represent nationalists, green, and unionists, orange, united in peace, white. There's a similar tradition about the Newfoundland tricolour, possibly my favourite flag in the world, green, white and startlingly pink. This last, supposedly, a representation of the English rose. The story goes that the green, white and orange flag was first presented to Thomas Maher Jr. in France in the revolutionary year of 1848, modelled on that country's own flag by a group of women who would have themselves have to have invented the white for peace bit, since that's not what it has traditionally represented in the French tricolour. There are several theories about what it does stand for there, the clergy being one, the closest to peace being égalité, to the liberté of blue, and red's fraternité. Newfoundland's white is for Scotland, from the colour of St Andrew's Cross. So why, I'm wondering, did I grow up referring to the flag as the green, white and gold? Because, you might say, I'm a Northern Protestant by birth, and the people I did my growing up among had a red, white and blue interest in selling the Irish tricolour short. So why then, I am wondering too, did my wife, Southern Catholic by birth, starting her growing up 11 years behind me, all the way down in Cork, home of then Taoiseach Jack Lynch, know it as the green, white and gold too? When I'm not searching eBay for Eucharistic Congress souvenirs on those late evening descents, I can lose myself for half an hour in a wiki hunt for the kits of teams competing in some international football league or other, trying to see if any colour theme emerges, and if it does, how that theme relates to the national colours. Jack Lynch was the first Taoiseach to have been born in Cork, and the last, until Micheál Martin was sworn in June 2020. Hi to everybody from Graffiti Theatre Company, by the way, my parents-in-law. Jack Lynch was the first Taoiseach to have been born in Cork, and the last until Micheál Martin was sworn in June 2020. An All-Ireland hurling champion with his county, Jack Lynch was. Lynch played his club hurling with Glen Rovers, formed the year of the Easter Rising. Its colours originally were green and gold hoops with white shorts, augmented by a third alternating black hoop in honour of the Rising's executed leaders. Elsewhere in the county, Bride Rovers, who also wore a strip of green, white and gold, wore a blue away kit because they were, as their website says, clashing with so many teams in various grades, e.g. Newton-Chandram, Blackrock and Ballymartle. I hold my saffron-bound notebook up to a photograph of the flag flown above the GPO in Easter 1916. The rightmost stripe of the flag is a shade lighter than the notebook's cover, though I'm bound to say the green is more jade than emerald. It could just be faded, as it has been suggested to me, other flags are that I've drawn people's attention to down the years. Or it could just be a really, really, really light orange. As to the recurrence of the word gold, that, I'm told, should be read or heard as poetic license. What, after all, rhymes with orange? See The Dying Rebel by the ever-reliable Wolfe Tones. My only son was shot in Dublin, fighting for his country bold. He fought for Ireland and Ireland only, the harp, the shamrock, green, white, and gold. Here's a tip. If you can't find a rhyme, do as the Newfoundlanders do. Start from the fly side and work back. This is the flag of Newfoundland, their anthem. The pink, the rose of England shows, the green, St. Patrick's emblem bright, while in between the spotless sheen of St. Andrew's Cross displays the white. So hail the pink, white, and green. At various moments, Irish nationalists have been as keen as unionists to tone down the orange, and rather than unite the traditions, the flag has been used to deepen the divide. And I don't just mean in the dim and distant past either. Even in the South, there has been a perception that it has been misappropriated or enlisted for sectional ends. My brother-in-law, a Dublin Protestant, tells me that the 1990 World Cup, Italia 90, when Ireland, under the management of Jack Charlton, made it all the way to the quarterfinals, helped him and others of his generation at last to embrace the tricolour. It was not just theirs anymore, the 32 county Republicans. It was ours, he says. If there is a referendum anytime soon, if there is a vote in favour of reunification, then the flag is going to have to form part of the conversation. I'm not saying it could not ever be all of ours, but there would be a monumental amount of work required before that day was arrived at, with no room along the way for further gold rhyming or other liberties with the colour wheel. And then I'm just going to read the last little bit, which is a little footnote. There are lots of footnotes in this book. This is a little flaggy footnote. In early September 2020, the BBC apologises following an item on its breakfast show in which an Irish tricolour was used to represent Northern Ireland in a graphic showing the different quarantine arrangements in place in the 4 constituent parts of the United Kingdom. It may have been an act of kindness, enabling DUP members to exercise their "this is disgraceful" and "I demand an apology" muscles while Stormont is in recess. They seize the opportunity loudly. Or it may have been that whoever was tasked in London with creating the graphic just didn't, in keeping with a great many people on the Big Island, have the first fucking clue.
Ben, thank you.
It's like the shower attachment in my hotel.
So this is the book. I'm worried, though, that you've got one that looks different to mine.
Oh, yeah.
The book, I mean.
That's
but anyway, the book in this format is available from all good bookshops, including Cathal O'Donovan. There are copies at the back there. We might even prevail upon you to sign some at the end. Oh,
gentleman in the front row has one.
Glenn, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So the book takes the form of it's a travelogue in five journeys. I think I counted them correctly.
Yes.
When lockdown rules, arranged in an ever more baroque fashion, as you remind us in the book, allow it. None of them to Cork.
I didn't get to Cork. No, I didn't get to Cork because of the lockdown restrictions just didn't permit it. It had always been in my head that I would get here. Obviously, I've got family here, and I thought I got to Waterford. I got to Tramore. I got to Tramore in the worst fog I have. You do see fog, don't you? It's everything else you don't see. In the worst fog I have ever seen, and I had a bizarre conversation with someone who I just had no idea who I was talking to. I was just following the cigarette butt, which was just all that was visible through the heavy sea fog. It turned out he was a tall gentleman. He'd just been sitting down for most of the time I'd been talking to him, and he was fairly adamant about what was going to happen. And am I? Oh, so that's okay. I thought you were from Tremor. That was no man. That was my husband.
She wasn't the tall gentleman.
Yeah. I thought you were just demonstrating the height he was earlier on. So I was also taking the opportunity of, as we all were, this is so, it feels like, that's 2020 I'm talking about. It's 3 years ago. I finished the book around about the autumn of 2020. It feels like a very, very long time ago now, but thinking of what we all lived through and how we experienced this, and all I did was I took every opportunity to go as far as I could go and to talk to whoever would stop and talk to me, which is sometimes difficult to do anyway, to get people to stop and talk to you. But during a pandemic, to approach people and ask them if they will stop, people just ran a lot of the time. And to stand around as I did, this was maybe not a great idea, near, say, Civil War or War of Independence memorials, and just, kind of try to talk to people about what was on them, and was maybe not a great idea either. So I travelled when I could. The journey to Tremor was really important one, because I went down in the car with my wife and daughters, and then I had to come back to Belfast. So I came back by train, and that was when it had never occurred to me. I mean, I knew Connolly because I always came into Connolly Station from Belfast, but it could have been. I'm not being facetious when I say it could have been Billy Connolly for all I knew. I mean, it was just Connolly Station. You know the way certain, they just, the names just stick to station. And I never reflected on Houston Station and then Kent Station in Cork. And then I suddenly realized, of course, all the stations I was passing through were named for executed leaders of the 1916 Rising. And then I then started looking at the entire network. And that happened only in, well, you'll know this, that happened in 1966. All the stations were renamed in 1966. But I began to wonder what would happen in the event of a referendum and a yes vote for reuniting the island. What happens to the names of stations? Do they stay as they are? Are they up for grabs? What are the bits that might change? So that was the question I was asking everybody. If this happens, what would you give in order for the thing you most want? If that's what you want, what would you give in order to have that?
And that's a really interesting point, because I think we'll come on to in the panel. 1916 has proven to be one of the parts of the revolutionary period that is easiest to reflect on in a harmonious way in the 26 counties. I mean, later parts, as the Taoiseach was alluding to gently, later parts of the revolutionary period, and in particular the Civil War, haven't produced a great raft of infrastructure labels, and probably won't. But so it's interesting. But on the subject of names, because I was a bit like you, until I was 9, I grew up in what is an unmistakably Protestant bit of Belfast, Braniel, or the Braniel, if you're. Yeah. And we would go from that bit of Belfast to West Cork every summer, to where our family came from. And there wasn't really anything in the middle. There was Belfast and there was West Cork. And West Cork was different in a number of ways, as you might gather, from Braniel. There's much lower profile presence for the UDA, for example. That was one of the things that stood out even in the minds of a fairly unobservant youth. And the bit in the middle we just drove through. I mean, it was a bit like the flyover states. These were the drive-through counties. Yeah. Now, we should bear in mind here, Glenn, that there are probably people from Dublin of a sensitive disposition, so tread softly, for we tread on their esteems and all of that. But what did you call it when you were growing up in that unmistakably bit? What did you call the bit south of the border?
But just down there. I think just, yeah. I mean, I have another book called Here's Me Here. In fact, that's my social media things. Yeah, I don't use them, but Here's Me Here. So it was because we lived, people from Northern Ireland meeting each other. It's easier just to call it here when you're there, because you don't have to get into that thing about the Northern Ireland, all that kind of stuff. You just say it's here, and so it was just down there, and of course the other island was over there, and the United States is way over there. So I got my kids. I got my kids to draw a map of the world. That I thought might be useful for the jacket of Here's Me Here, which is kind of collection of like various newspaper and radio pieces over the years. And I said, so like imagine this is the center of the world and it's here, and then everything else is like way over there. And I think Europe's just like the other bit that they have, And yeah, anyway, so here, down there, call it down there.
And what in these 5? I mean, you've already mentioned you're married to a Cork woman.
Yeah.
So kosher. But what did you in the 5 journeys that go into this book? What did you learn about how people down here talk about up there now, or do they? Because one of the things that comes through is some of the words, some of the language that you capture in those conversations.
I mean, you grew up in Belfast, so you're familiar with people who are just the term slabber, for somebody who's just like a bit mouthy and slabber, and cheeky. Or, by the way, I really, I'm just dreading. All I can think is I said that Connolly Station might have been named for Billy Connolly. I never thought that. Never, ever, really ever thought that. If anybody's doing any tweeting or anything like that, I always knew who it was. I know that there's some of the things in this book are there's a particular tone to this. I know. And but there was an awful lot of I was being very open-minded about this. I have I'm not going to say I have no real well, for what it's worth, history is far longer than any of us actually have any sense of at all. I mean, everything that we fear might happen or you really want, well, it's going to happen. There will be a 32 county Ireland. Again, or is it 33? Is North Tip and South Tip? Is that 2? Is that see?
2 ridings. There are 2 ridings.
Okay, so or there'll be all those things. So there'll be, it'll all happen. It just might not happen this generation or the generation after that. And then once it happens, that's not the end. That's and the European Union. I hate to break it to anybody who thinks otherwise, but it'll end too, because every other thing that human beings have ever done has ended. That's the one thing we know from history. Nothing has lasted for, more than, centuries is pretty good going for things. So these things are going to happen. It's about how they happen, about when they happen. Most things, you break up in confusion, you break up in war, or you achieve things by kind of peaceful negotiation. So I think that the 6 into 26, the answer to that, here I go just destroying any book sales I might have had. The answer is yes, of course it will eventually go. It's going to happen. But I think that the way in which it was being discussed was, I just thought really, as Atonish just said, I really got the sense that it was reinforced for me in those journeys that I was making, that people really either don't have a lot of knowledge, or really just don't have an awful lot of interest. And here's a really simple thing. Those of us who are going to be on the panel later on, we were all talking just before we came here, just saying hello to each other. And something that struck me, we're talking about something that had been on the news, and of course, we just watch different news programs. That's a really fundamental difference. The majority of people who I know in Northern Ireland don't watch the RTE news. They just don't. If I switch on the radio in the morning, I switch on Radio 4 and Radio Ulster. It's not that I don't have an interest. It's just that's where my mortgage rates are going to be reported on. That's where all of those kinds of things. That's where I'm going to find them. So there's a huge amount of stuff that we just don't know about each other. We don't understand things that are so natural about how government is organised, about orders of business, all of that stuff on the door. We're just not getting it. And likewise, you're not getting it. People here aren't getting it from Northern Ireland. So,
and did you discern an appetite? Because in some of the conversations you report, and obviously these are different people in different places, but it's people seemed almost, as you described it, sort of almost pathologically 26 counties in there.
Yeah.
This is essentially us having a conversation with ourselves about what we do or don't do with the big mad children up there. And then others were prepared to. Did you get a sense of a changing appetite? And if so, how would you encourage that appetite for the learning exactly what you just described?
I think obviously the model for how not to do things is Brexit, the more preparation, the more shared island, which is about an incredibly good term to use, avoiding Ireland in there, but so the things that we do, there are ways in which we can have conversations that will maybe enable us to get to know each other and understand each other better. But in the end, the vote is going to be exactly like Brexit. People aren't going to vote. It's not going to be there that people are voting with. It's going to be wherever we feel that thing. Because during the Brexit referendum, we were Remainers, and we couldn't understand the Leavers. And my wife and I sat one night and we tried to explain to one another. We're people who listen to radio. We read daily newspapers. We would consider ourselves to be pretty well informed on political matters, not just at home, but globally. And we tried to explain to one another the European Union, how it worked, what all the different bits were, who was who, where was where. And we broke down after a wee while. We couldn't remember names of people. We couldn't remember functions. So we realized that actually our really well-informed desire to remain part of the European Union was as emotional as the feeling that people had who wanted to leave. And I think the same thing is going to happen. No matter how much preparation there's going to be, in the end, it's going to be a kind of, I feel this is the right thing. And that's what's going to happen.
And if you were thinking about the journeys that you took in reverse, what do you think the tall smoker of indeterminate sex in the fog would say to a southerner asking similar sorts of questions? Forget the indeterminate sex thing, that doesn't really matter.
Well, you would want the fog to clear just so you'd see if there are any flags flying from lampposts and things. before you ask those questions. I think it's no secret that there is. I think there's a growing expectation that among those who think that a referendum is necessary and soon, that it's going to be a yes. For me, the one thing that would be of real benefit to those who think otherwise would be, and mathematically, by the way, it's an inevitability, because you do know how it works, don't you, about the referendum? So you have a referendum. If it's no, you can run it again 7 years' time. If it's no, you can run it again 7 years' time. If it's no, 7 years' time. If it's no, 7 years' time. If it's no, you keep doing that. If it's yes, you stop. So that's it. So mathematically, it's written in there. Have we got that right? You don't get a second. You don't get 7 years after that. Say, did we do the right thing? Can we change our minds? That's not going to happen. So it's only one yes. You could have, many thousands of no's, but only one yes, and that's it. So that's why it's going to happen. And I think the one thing, so the phrase that's used and is we need to start the conversation now. We need to start preparing. But what is off-putting about that to those who fear the referendum is that there's at the back of that is the certainty almost that it's going to be a yes vote. And I think what would be a really useful thing to do would be to start the conversation where the first referendum returns a no vote. And how do we live as a divided island, or as an island that has a government in the north that's aligned to the United Kingdom and a government in Dublin? How do we do that and still live well together? So I think that would be a really useful thing just to put into that conversation. How do we prepare for the 7 years or the 14 years or the 21 years of referenda that return a no vote? And that hasn't been part of the conversation. I think it's a really, really simple thing. It's like the invention of zero, and what that did for us, for the world in mathematics when they invented zero. And so just putting that in changes the conversation, because we're going to have to think about all eventualities. And I think at the minute, too much is focused on what will happen when the referendum returns a yes vote.
And I mean, that's really interesting. Both the description of the anxiety that must be in the fear of a unionist at the construction of a discussion that appears to lead inevitably and inexorably to one destination only. That doesn't feel like a conversation. That seems like an instruction. Mm-hmm. But what then would that conversation that you're describing, which doesn't begin with the conclusion, the constitutional conclusion, but begin somewhere else, what would the words be? What would we be talking about?
Flag. I think I can't remember if I came up with this phrase or if somebody else did, but an all-divided Ireland is maybe what we should aspire to, which is kind of in the other book, which I now have in my hand, in the Backstop Land book, I wrote about going to Fork Hill in South Armagh and talking to people there, and that was heavily fortified. During the Troubles, British Army towers, and I was with a photographer called Donovan Wiley who had photographed the decommissioning of those towers. And but we talked to a lot of people who lived there and about their experiences of the border. And one woman who, when there were British Army checkpoints on the border, insisted on going from Fork Hill to Dundalk to do her shopping. She would just keep crossing the border to do it, and since they got rid of the checkpoint, she just went to Newry because it was handier. But there's maybe a kind of a healthy, not antagonism, but it's okay to kind of like have a provincial rivalry. I was I keep saying I was in Cork. I hope a lot of you who've been through Cork will have seen this. I'd seen it for the first time, which was End Dublin Rule in Cork, on all the electricity boxes around the town. So that kind of strong regional identity. Is it going to be a federal? Are we going to have Stormont? I mean, keeping Stormont or a parliament in the north, could that be a way of having the all divided Ireland? So that to me would seem to be something that would be worth contemplating. Looking again at the two islands might be useful, and how those kind of east-west relationships as well as the north-south relationships, how those are talked about, how they operate, which of the things from the Good Friday Agreement, which of the strands and the institutions might be usefully retained. And to my mind, the Good Friday Agreement persists after, say, there was a referendum with a yes vote. That doesn't get rid of the Good Friday Agreement to me. I think there's a real difference. Sorry, I'm talking an awful lot. That was like.
Well, that was the idea. I mean,
I don't think very many people in the South have thought too much about attachment to symbols, anthems, flags, and it's me doing. Is it a wasp? Yeah. So what? Yes, wearing gold and green hoops. It's the way kit. These things are important, and the conversations I described meeting. I was down in Birr. I'd never been in Birr before, and but I went to Birr, and I bumped into a couple of people in Birr coming out of the Church of Ireland Church. I'd only stopped there because it had a sign that said this was the site of the world's first motoring fatality. It's positioned in such a way as to, I don't know how it's been the only one there, because I hit the brakes reversed at speed to see the sign to make sure I'd read it correctly. And it's outside the Church of Ireland Church, and the service was just getting out, and I got talking to a couple of people who were just coming out of it, and I had a really interesting conversation. But they said, so Church of Ireland, Irish men, and one of them was born in Belfast, very close to where my mum comes from, at the top of the Woodvale Road, and they felt very strongly. They're absolutely Irish, but they felt very strongly that the parity of esteem kinds of conversations that we've been having in Northern Ireland for 25 years, you'd never guess it sometimes, the way that we've had to reflect on things like the flying of flags, and respecting one another's traditions, that those things really don't exist here. And nobody has realised that a united Ireland is going to involve having those conversations.
And that was really interesting. I mean, the two people, but you name them in the book, so I'm not betraying any confidences, are Salter Sterling and Michael Hanna, and there'll be several people here who know them, are probably related to them.
I got the feeling they just kind of stood around there all the time, just waiting for people to stop at that at that sign and come back out.
But it's interesting because the Taoiseach also mentioned that idea that we have begun to think about the way in which different strands of the national story are told, different traditions are heard. But it's taken a while. What would you, I mean, before we turn it open to questions, because there will be lots, but I mean, just on that very point, there's a sort of curious, the possibility of the post-1998, the Good Friday Agreement and all of that, as an accelerant to this kind of plurality that's taken in the 26 counties us some time to get to. What would you, how would you apply that?
So that would kind of accelerate that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and so that the what your two correspondents in Birr were saying is taking 100 years. How would you do it in less?
I don't know that I would even attempt to do it in less. I think I would just kind of take the foot off the pedal. That would be the first thing I would do, off the accelerator. I don't know, in all honesty, how much the political parties who call most often for a referendum actually really want one to happen. Not unlike the Conservative Party with the Brexit referendum, they didn't really want it, but they had to keep talking about it, and then they got it, and that was it. And so I'm not sure whether, in their heart of hearts, they do want it. But I would say I just think things need to progress rather more slowly. That there's we could do with maybe all of us could do with after the spasm of Brexit, which is not over yet. But it's been enormously destabilizing. And when I say that I think that we all vote emotionally finally, our sense of ourselves, of who we are, how we relate to our neighbours, a couple of streets away, a couple of townlands over, further down the motorway. Those are subject to change. Small political changes can affect those. When I was at university, I went to university in England, and it was in the mid-1980s, and it was the time of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and there were something like 300,000 people out protesting in the centre of Belfast, and that was the time of, Ulster says no, no, that never, 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 that, and there were all these people, and they were, to a man and woman, I would say Protestant, they were certainly Unionist, and my English friends were looking at this, and one of them said, "Who the fuck are those people?" They just couldn't believe it. They'd see these Union flags, and they'd see all of this, looting SS Moore's sports shop and all the stuff that went on, and they said, "Who are they?" They didn't understand that, and I thought, I know who they are. There was a lot of people, members of my family were there, lots of people I grew up with were there, and they were out there because something had happened. It was a small kind of handshake on the TV, but the ripples of that really, really, really were fairly seismic, and I just think that we need to recognise, all of us, how these, any of these changes, how they affect our individual sense of ourselves and how we relate to each other.
Yeah, I like that idea of slow politics. Maybe this is something that needs to be worked on. And it's all for somebody who, with Victoria and others, runs a history festival. I'm enormously heartened by your observations about the everlasting nature of history and the constant necessity.
There are going to be a lot of these. There's going to be like the 107th one is going to be an interesting one. So there was a guy apparently at the 7th one, and he said,
with this amazing theory about wasps.
Yes. And what was the Taoiseach was what we used to have before Belfast became the capital, and. Well, look,
and there's a lot we could touch on. I'm conscious we've got about 15 minutes before people
Has
are
anybody
released.
thought about that? I mean, if it came to that, would you be? How would you feel about? Well, yes, I know. Yeah, there's a. Yeah, I could just see I could just see tractors making their way up the M1, back up to Belfast, stopping at the Apple Green. Burr might be, yes.
Vision.
Well, Burr was the historic centre of auto accidents. That's right. Yeah.
Question? Have we got?
Do you know, maybe what we'll do is talk endlessly, and that wouldn't be a bad thing. Well, actually, you'll think it would be if you're listening to me. You'll say, but no, maybe, talking's not bad, and thinking about things and thinking. I mean, meeting those guys in Burr was really, really interesting to me, and it's not I'm very comfortable in my Irishness. I'm equally comfortable in my Britishness and my Northern Irishness and my Belfastardness, if that's exactly how you call that. But I'm not, none of those, and none of them are exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive. They all sit very, very comfortably on me and in me. But I would feel the lesser without any of them. And I think maybe that's a way to think about this, that we are all, and of course, again, as the Taoiseach said, and as as you've said yourself, Sam, there are many versions of Irishness, and the numbers of the versions of Irishness have only increased in recent times, and the island is the better for them. We are more for having those multiple identities. We're not less. We're not divided. We're multiplied by those. So, I think there is no end to that. Actually, that was a sentence without end.
Who has questions for Glenn? So can you just wait for them? For the
microphone coming.
Here.
For those in the north that might say no in a referendum, would that be based on fear or dislike?
That's a very good question. I think you often hear dislike. I think a combination of both, and fear based on fear doesn't always really have to have a really plausible cause. But there might be, you know, of course, the National Health Service always gets mentioned, and you know, I have to and fro conversations about whether the National Health Service is actually any good anyway. But you know, there are certain things. What's going to happen to pensions? There are all kinds of really important conversations. So there are fears born out of things like that. There are more atavistic fears about you know, their safety, their identity, their culture. So that would be, I think, a very big part of that. And by the way, that stuff about the flag, I think that's, you know, the green, white, and orange. I've been seeing flags all around the place. It got turned down. Orange got turned down in the Irish flag. There's absolutely no question. It got turned down in the Irish flag for a number of years. I think the Eucharistic Congress might have had a big part to play in that in 1932. But I think, you know, there are things that people might reasonably look and can't see themselves in the state or the state that might come. So there are fears based on that. But there is some dislike. I mean, I think that's quite clear. You hear it. And that goes in reverse as well. And by the way, I mean, one of the things I've heard an awful lot, my younger daughter is 17, started going to gigs and things in Dublin. You know, she's, some of the things she reports back about attitudes to people from the north, from young people who she meets, is actually quite startling and depressing. Brexit has led to a rise in anti-Britishness, I think, here in this state. I mean, it's mapped onto kind of anti-Toryism, but sometimes it just comes out sounding anti-Brit, and sometimes you hear that in the north, and you think, well, these people feel themselves to be partly British too. So there's all I'm saying is that yes, there is some dislike that goes in the other direction too. And I do hear, one of the things I do hear that I think from younger people that I think is quite alarming is that none of this needs to be discussed because the North lost. I think maybe this will come up in our discussion about the decade of centenaries. One of the read-throughs, is that how you say that? The read-throughs of that is that actually it's just been 100 years war of independence, and it's about to come. The referendum would bring it to its end, and more or less slap it up them. Those of them who lost, and that's I hear that quite a lot actually. So nothing needs to change. So is it?
I think there's a theory out there that Cork is the real capital. At the time of independence for the Free State, Belfast was actually the largest city in the island of Ireland, and I don't think it was ever entertained as being a capital of the island or of an independent Ireland. But many years ago, when I was a student in Cork, a lecturer made the point that in all opinion polls taken in Northern Ireland, or in opinion polls taken in Northern Ireland, 30% of, he said, both communities saw themselves first and foremost as Northern Irish. Is there a possibility or that Northern Ireland might wish to go it alone?
I don't think ever. I mean, over the years, there were, including the political party most closely aligned with or identified with, the UDA. That's how you say that. The political party most closely aligned with or identified with, the UDA, did actually publish a paper on UDI. The UDA on UDI. I don't think it ever could go alone, but I mean, I have a real feeling of northernness. You know, I think Northern Ireland is the border, and the border partition has kind of made us all a bit stranger, you know, in our own ways. There are peculiarities, you know, in the north. Or there are things that are particular to that place that I think will take a long time if they ever change, and I'm not sure which of them were there to begin with. But I think, I said, might there be a federal Ireland? I don't know. Might be worth thinking about, but I don't know that there would be a big appetite for it to go it alone at all. But I think kind of keeping a sense of Northern Ireland, or the North, or or whether it's Ulster again, how you think about it, keeping some sense of that. Derry, of course, would have much to say about Belfast in that circumstance, or that eventuality. And my phone, my screensaver on my phone is of my children walking down from Cave Hill in Belfast, and when they were young, and actually you'll see from my screensaver, when they were not so young, I would make us all go up to Cave Hill at every opportunity to stand at McCart's Fort, where the leaders of the United Irish Movement stood in 1792 and swore to unite all Irish men and women, irrespective of their creed. And that, to me, is still literally the high point of politics. The revolutionary, radical Presbyterians of the 1790s who founded the Linen Hall Library, which still exists in Belfast, all of that, those are my fellows. And that ideal lives on, it has not always been best served by those who claim to be its inheritors. Which is a bit like my drive here. It started out on the right road, but then I went down a couple of R's and onto an L eventually. So sorry, I started trying to answer your question, but ended up in somebody's field. So one more question.
We've time for one more.
There's kind of an unspoken assumption in a lot of these conversations that the Republic is going to vote yes. What do you think will happen if the North votes yes and the Republic votes no?
I think, I tell you, what does actually happen is that we just do it again in 7 years' time. And probably, who would be, it'd be a bit like Eurovision. We'd come back again and they'd rerun it, and Graham Norton would be presenting. And we'd see how it went the next time around. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, but I do think that, saving the presence of certain people in the room, I think, there's an election coming relatively soon here. I think that conversation, it'd be interesting to see how that conversation develops in the next few years. It'll also be interesting to see how parties who are not currently in government, once they're in government, dealing with the things that one has to deal with in government, just how high up the agenda the referendum is at that point. So, I'm not sure, as somebody said to me in a bar in Burr, as a guy in a bar in Burr said to me, if I was Michael Long, I'd just go away. I'd go home and I'd write that, and that'd be the end. That'd be a short poem. A guy in the bar in Burr said to me, I forgot what he said.
That wouldn't happen to Michael Longley.
He said no. He did. He couldn't see it far enough. Was the thing. Couldn't see the north far enough. The guy in the bar and bar.
Glenn, and you referred there in passing to Eurovision. Of course, what was drawing you south first was the Johnny Logan biopic.
Yes.
But they're all desperate to know what's happened to the Johnny Logan biopic before they go for their pizza.
the Johnny Logan biopic is the film term in turnaround. So it maybe doesn't really exist anymore. Because Johnny Logan, obviously the only person to have won the Eurovision twice. In fact, he's the only person to have won the Eurovision twice. Because the Eurovision Song Contest is, of course, a songwriters competition. So he won it twice as a singer, and then he won it twice as a songwriter. So he won it twice. But now somebody else has won it twice, so that's the second person to win it twice. So as you can see, it's a harder thing to do the elevator pitch. You just be standing with your hand on the elevator wall, said, bear with me a wee minute, we'll just go to the top and come back down again. So he was the first person to win it twice. That's the pitch, no. So anyway, so it's not happening at the minute.
Well,
which is a shame,
it
because Hold Me Now is just...
a slogan with which we can all agree.
Yes.
So, well, look, Glenn, you've kicked us off wonderfully after the introduction from the Taoiseach. Thank you. We are going to have more of Glenn on a panel thinking a little bit about the decade of centenaries in about an hour's time.
I love your belt.
It's Kenyan.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah. Strongly advised, if you're talking to Simon, just talk to him afterwards, have a quick look at the belt.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, that
Thank you very much.
started as well as it began.